better.
Forgive my ignorance. Sorry to interrupt you. What's purchasing power? Is it just?
Well, so if you could buy a loaf of bread,
Mhm.
100 years ago with a gram of gold, you can still buy a loaf of bread with a gram of gold today. But
Okay.
a pound 100 years ago would have bought you 10 loaves of bread, or 100 loaves of bread maybe,
Yeah.
right? But today it buys you far fewer loaves of bread, if even one, because it's lost its purchasing power. Each unit of money it buys you less, and much, much less, 99% less, in fact.
Unscripted.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to today's special finance-related unscripted podcast. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a bit of an ignoramus when it comes to finance, so I thought let me look for two experts in the Islamic finance field to help have some interesting discussions and instill some of their expertise into this new economy that we'll be finding ourselves in. We have a regular on this podcast, Umer Suleman, Sheikh Umer Suleman, Ustad Pir Umer Suleman. Assalamu alaikum, bro.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How's it going?
All good, Jazakallah.
This is where we do the fake salam, like we haven't been speaking for the last, testing our mics for the last 5 minutes. But it's my pleasure to introduce also, alongside Omar, is Sheikh Tarek Diwany. He's a well-known Islamic finance expert, author of The Problem with Interest, and another book I just Googled right now, which is called Islamic Banking and Finance, What It Is and What It Could Be. So, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Tarek.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah. I'm not a sheikh yet, I should point out.
Still got a few months left. Yeah. Inshallah. It's when all your hair goes white, then you're the really become a sheikh, isn't it? I wanted to speak to you guys because the topic of the economy has been front and center with all the pandemic coverage and all these rescue packages and furlough scheming and all these types of things that I completely totally know the meanings of. But one thing I was wondering, I wanted to maybe start this off with this question: where does all this money come from? Right. So we saw the Chancellor of this Exchequer. We saw the Prime Minister saying, we've got this scheme and that scheme, and we're getting this company, small companies are going to get a grant, and if you're furloughed, you're not working anymore, we're going to pay 80% of your wages and stuff. For a financial ignoramus like me, I'm thinking, where is this money coming from? Are they printing it somewhere, or was it somewhere that we had all along?
The money tree, isn't that what they called it?
The money tree, yeah. It's an orchard now, right?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Anyone who wants to jump in.
Well, I think there's been this kind of duplicity over many decades over this issue of what can be spent and where money can be spent by the government in particular. And arguments have been made many times that we can't build more houses or hospitals or schools or roads because there isn't enough money. And yet there have been increasingly frequent occasions in these last 20 years where suddenly there has been enough money to do things that were not countenanced in previous decades. Fight wars, one of them. Bail out banks in the 2008 financial crisis, pay 80% of people's wages in the current crisis. And this money suddenly does appear when it's really needed. Now, the duplicity arises because in most cases, the government says, well, we have to borrow this money and repay it. And arguments are made of a kind which have been going on since really before the Second World War. Keynes was making them, saying that people have been saying, for example, in the government that a household has to save before it spends. It can only spend what it has, earned. And Keynes was pointing out before the Second World War that, well, actually, you can't treat the economy in the way that you treat a household. If everybody tries to save in the economy, it might be right at the individual level, but then the economy will collapse because no one will be buying anything. And so he differentiated between what the society as a whole can do and what the individual does. And likewise, he differentiated between what the government can do and what the individual can do. And it is an overriding truth, and this is the point, that the government can do one thing that people cannot do, and that is that it can create money from nothing. And we add to that that increasingly in recent decades, it is not just the government that can create money through the central bank usually, but it is the commercial banks that also create money. When they lend money, commercial banks in aggregate are actually creating new money. And so it is not actually true that we have to earn and save before we spend. We can certainly spend because we have the power to create from nothing, so we don't need to earn first. And these discussions have to be held in that context.
Jazakallah khair. So are you saying, Tarek, that when I go out and get a loan from a bank or I spend something on a credit card, it's actually being made up out of nothing?
Well, the money supply in aggregate is, in the main, being created out of nothing by either the central bank under the authority of the government, or by the commercial banks, the HSBCs and Lloyds and Barclays. And that is the way it works in the world today. I mean, whether you're in America or Saudi Arabia or Indonesia, money is generally created out of nothing by the banking system, one or other parts of the banking system.
And
unless you need to pay back the US, or the West, generally they want the real money or things of real value. So you couldn't create money. So for example, Pakistan couldn't just create Pakistani rupees to pay the US, because that's why everything's in dollars. And this is where it makes the whole kind of system unjust, because it's tilted in the favor of those who can create the wealth for themselves. And then when you look at, I guess, the international trade, currency, which is the dollar, they can just print more dollars if they wanted to, or create artificial entries for dollars. But when they ask for it back, they're asking for real money back from other countries. And that's why also you find that a lot of the issues around the world have been kind of started from the fact that countries want to depeg from the dollar. And there's a whole separate conversation around this. And at the heart of it is money creation, and then by default from that control.
Assalamualaikum guys, sorry to butt in, but if you're enjoying this podcast, please head over to islam21c.com/donate to help us make more. And if you're not enjoying it, head over anyway and help us make better ones. These kind of powerful countries are allowed to create money, but
no, it's
allowed. I mean, the fact is that if you're Zimbabwe or maybe Yemen, or that no one's going to want your money, because generally nothing's produced there that people want to buy. I mean, the fact is that America, European Union countries, the Chinese produce lots of things that people want to buy, and therefore they have to have those currencies in order to buy those things generally.
So,
if you have the power to create Zimbabwe dollars or whatever the currency is there, I think I saw a $1 trillion Zimbabwe note recently, actually. Of course, the government can print money, but who wants it?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me put this to you and kind of devil's advocate, right? So, this pandemic happened. The thing that saved the economy, saved people's jobs, and allowed them to put food on the table is this ability to create money from nothing. You Muslims and Islamic finance argues against creating money from nothing. What would you guys have done? Aren't we being saved now by this un-Islamic system of creating money?
Well, the Islamic finance sector doesn't generally agree that money creation is wrong. I mean, there's the modern element, it actually accepts it fully, because all Islamic banks do that, and they never make an issue of this when they pass fatwa. The scholars who do so, I mean, they may not agree with money creation, but they don't make it an issue in their judgments. They just go over it, okay? But the point, has been that that others have made, including myself, is that you can't build a system of justice upon a fundamental injustice. And as I've said many times, if I was to create money out of nothing in my own home, I'd go to prison. So why should banks be allowed to do it, right?
Yeah.
Now, unless you're prepared to answer that question directly, and say that it's prohibited, then one really shouldn't move on to build an institution on that process.
Yeah, I completely agree with Tarek. And if you look at it, when the whole Bretton Woods thing happened, because money used to be pegged against gold and silver, so that's why the dollar's called the silverback, there was some sort of value attached to it. At the time that they decided to kind of depeg, and Tarek, did it happen globally at the same time, or was it kind of in sequence? When
the United States did it, sterling came out, in the 30s, there was a de-link to gold, and then the United States went back on it. In the 70s, the United States came off. Most other countries had been off for some time by that stage.
Can you explain what Bretton Woods means? I mean, obviously, I know what you mean,
made
Umer.
In 1944, to a new sort of international monetary order to create stability after the Second World War, and basically currencies around the world tried to link to the United States dollar to have a fixed exchange rate system, and the United States dollar would peg itself to gold, and you would be able to redeem a dollar for a certain amount of gold in the United States. And it wasn't absolutely fixed. There were movements, but it was sort of fixed, flexible, if you see what I mean. And it was designed to bring stability, which is all fine. The intentions are good. You've just had a war. You want to bring some stability and start people building, their economies again. But there's always this underlying question: is that how you should manage things, or are we to go from a legal basis and say that we have to prohibit injustices and that's how we build our economy, or do you say we want to achieve X and let's do anything that's required in order to achieve X, which in the current situation, as we are today, has involved printing lots of money. Now, one has to have some kind of, let's say, philosophical or conceptual basis at the legal level for deciding how you approach these issues. Are the objectives what are those what count, or are the legal principles upon which you act count? Are they what count? Because the two can lead to very different outcomes, right?
So what's the injustice in creating money? Briefly, if it's to help, you need stability. You need, for example, pandemic. People need to feed themselves. Where's the injustice in just creating more money?
Yes, well, if normally people, in order to earn money, have to work for it. They have to give some value, and they get some value back in the form of pounds or dollars or whatever, right? If you have a system in which somebody doesn't have to give any value, he just prints some money and gives it to you, and you give him a car or a house or a battleship, or some land, then eventually that system leads to total bankruptcy. Why should anyone work if you can just print money? So what's happened is that the banking, and you've seen this, the banking sector has grown enormously because bankers have realized, well, why should we work for a living? We can just print money and lend it at interest, right?
Yeah.
And so
you
have transactions in which someone gives nothing and takes something, and that's not a basis for economic success.
So
if you think of interest, Salman, if you think of interest being unjust, and that's based on some money being going out. Now you imagine creating money from nothing completely. That's that's a layer on top of interest. And this is a problem when you started creating money. At least when it was pegged to gold and silver, there was this whole point is economic exchange. There was something of value in exchange for something else of value. When you have, as Tarek is saying completely, that look, you're creating out of nothing. All of the wealth flows one way then of real value. And this is what we've seen. That look, when everything goes, if tomorrow, if there was a complete blackout on the financial system and all of your records of data were gone, how many people would actually have any real wealth? And this is it's all part of a mirage. And the point I was making earlier about depegging from gold and silver, at that time, the scholars, I don't know if you're aware of it at that time, Tarek, was there much discussion from the scholars on the impact of doing that?
In the 1930s or in the 70s?
In the 70s.
Depegging from the dollar itself, you mean from the dollar and not from gold?
Yes, sorry. There was this awakening in 1975 and 1976 when there was a conference in Makkah on Islamic economics, and it was the first major post-war gathering really to bring international thinkers
on Islam together. And prior to that, there had been some thinking, in Pakistan among some scholars there. There had been some thinking in Egypt among some of the scholars there, but there was no unified response. There were, and you can actually tell this because in 1971, when the states came off the gold standard, it was only 4 years later when the Islamic Development Bank decided that it would define the Islamic dinar, which has for 1400 years been a measure of gold of approximately 4.25 grams. It would define it as a special drawing right issued by the IMF, which is a piece of artificial currency that's not even tradable really outside of central banks. And so that was the stage of at which we were, and how far behind the times the Muslim community was in its discourse.
So do you think the answer is cryptocurrencies then? Because I saw a documentary about that on Netflix, and I think I'm an expert in it now. So do you think the answer to money, governments creating money out of nothing, is some kind of crowd kind of created blockchain technology that no one can just create something if they want it out of nothing? It's pegged to something. I think the energy is required to mine bitcoins or something. Is that the future?
My view on this is that it depends whether you're looking at it in context or at an absolute level. If you need to pass a legal judgment on it, then I think there is some grey in this, but on balance, I argue against it. If you're judging it in the context of fiat money, in other words, the money that the government creates, or the wider money supply types that are created by the private banks, if you measure it against that, then the issues are different, because then you actually have to judge on a lesser of two evils basis. I think, to put it crudely.
You'd say it's a step in the right direction to reduce the.
Well, look, I mean, if it is true with cryptocurrency, assuming it's true that it is totally anonymous and encrypted and unbreakable, that there are no backdoors that could wipe out the computer systems, right? Uncorruptible, which I don't believe personally. I mean, we don't even know who the real designer is, right? How can we know what he designed? I mean, if he's put a backdoor in there, then we wouldn't know about it, presumably anyway. But let's say that it is uncorruptible and anonymous. Now, the fact is that if you hold dollar balances or euro or sterling or yuan balances, there is somebody out there who can press a button and cancel those balances, freeze them effectively, and stop you using them. There are many individuals, many organizations, some countries even, who do not have access to their money because it's in a bank somewhere where there's a government that's hostile to their particular behaviors, all right? If you then bring up cryptocurrency and say, well, this money could not be cancelled or frozen, right? Then you could say actually it's an improvement because your ownership of your wealth is more complete. And on that basis, if you're going to argue on that basis, then I think there's a strong argument, and it's what many of the crypto advocates put forward these days. And that's their argument. Now, I think that's a fair argument if it's truly based, technically on unbreakable code and a secure system.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you on that, Tarek. I think there's a lot of claims with regards to the cryptocurrencies yet to be tested. Even, I mean, they have this thing about 51% and the firewalls, and all it takes is for a country or an organization with that amount of computing power to rewrite the ledger. And I agree. I don't think it's completely safe. And your point is so accurate in terms of when you compare it to fiat currency and being the lesser of the two evils. I think there is an argument for cryptos versus the current economic system if it weakens that power block that's there, if it's going to do that. But what you don't want to do, it's like moving from capitalism to a Chinese-based economic system. You're moving from one kind of imperial force to another, and all of these points come into play. Like, is our wealth still protected? And then we go to the principles of the Sharia. Then, is your wealth protected? Is it definable? And I don't think crypto has the answer to that yet. I still have an issue in terms of the utility that surrounds it, and having some real economic value. I guess we've kind of moved away from that with a lot of the discussion.
So what is your call then? What do you suggest as a replacement? Do you think going back to a gold standard or something, is that practical in today's day and age? Someone could argue, well, what's so special about gold and silver? Isn't it just something shiny, and people thousands of years ago started to use that as constructed some kind of wealth to it?
Yeah, you see, people still do. I mean, there are those who will argue that it's old-fashioned and that we have to move on and technology. But the fact is that no one can take a piece of gold away from you if it's in your back pocket. Whereas these other solutions that we have for running a monetary system, all of them can become terribly corrupted and have been, in terms of the value of the unit, which, if you look at sterling, for example, it's lost 98% of its purchasing power in the last century. Gold hasn't. Gold has actually increased slightly in purchasing power, so it's actually held its value and it's done the job of money better.
Forgive my ignorance. Sorry to interrupt you. What's purchasing power? Is it just?
Well, so if you could buy a loaf of bread, 100 years ago with a gram of gold, you can still buy a loaf of bread with a gram of gold today.
Okay.
But a pound 100 years ago would have bought you 10 loaves of bread, or 100 loaves of bread maybe, right? Yeah. But today it buys you far fewer loaves of bread, if even one, because it's lost its purchasing power. Each unit of money it buys you less, and much less, 99% less, in fact. So. If you're trying to define what money is, then just look at reality around you. It's not just Muslims who like buying gold, right? I mean, there are people of all persuasions. Chinese like doing it. Austrian economists like doing it.
Indians.
So, Indians buy it. It's well known as part of the culture and part of the wealth protection activities of many societies. So first of all, people have to argue against facts on the ground. Secondly, they have to argue, if they want to, as Muslims, against prophetic tradition. And if the Prophet, peace be upon him, allowed you to trade by exchanging gold for some other object of sale in a transaction, then you can't prohibit it. I mean, that's the basic rule.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, there are these, issues that we've just been coming from in terms of, security and so forth, that we are sort of sleepwalking as a global village into this situation where people can track whatever you're doing. You go shopping with your Visa card, they know where you are, what you're buying, how much you're spending. Do people really want to live like that? So please, people, I think, should at least consider that it is a valid opinion to say, I don't want people to know what I'm spending, where I'm spending it, when I'm spending it on what, and how much of it I have, if you don't mind, and gold gives you that. Okay. So there are these, political security considerations apart from the issue of, does it protect my value? Apart from the legal issues of, is it permitted or prohibited in Islam if you happen to be a Muslim discussing the question.
Yeah. So imagine if before this pandemic, Muslims, we got our act together and we had some kind of Islamic economic system where the currency that we trade is somehow linked to gold and silver, or gold and silver directly, and then the pandemic hit.
Yes.
What would have happened then? How would have things been different?
This is a very good question. Umer, I know I'm talking a lot, and
no, I'm enjoying it.
I don't know what's happened to me today. But do you want to answer that?
No, please. I'll jump in. I'm on here most every other week anyway, so.
Well, this is one question that has been asked through the centuries, actually, since the paper money banking system came into being in force 300 years ago. Many philosophers, politicians, economists have said, look, the thing that paper money does for you as a government is that when you want to fight a war, you can pay for it. And if you have to pay gold for it, right, and you don't happen to have any, you can't just print the gold out of existence. Now, I understand this is a very strong argument, actually, in the sense that it gives a centralized authority the ability to mobilize resources quickly without having to go to people and say, sorry, guys, we want to tax half of your gold now, give it to us, otherwise we're sending the police in, right? Yeah. Now, if you are an authority governing a country and you're faced with those two ways of running the country, it's so much easier to devalue the monetary unit by printing a whole load more of it and buying your materials for war and paying your soldiers, because nobody knows it's happening until prices begin to rise a year or so later, or 2 years later, or whenever. I think people who argue in favor of a commodity-based money system have to get to grips with that situation. And the only way of doing it is by placing the money not as the sole answer to all our problems. Having gold coinage is not going to solve, all the problems. It will solve a lot of them, I do believe, having an honest money system. But it has to come within a framework that supports, this sort of whole vision of where money sits within the economy. And one of the things that you could say if you were a Muslim looking at this is that soldiers aren't bought with money in Islam. It's actually a duty that you fight, right? And I mean, that is not just a small coincidence here. It has its part to play within the system, you see. And unless we start to address wider issues like that, and how we tax people, how we invest that money, as Umer said at the beginning, the charging of interest is innately connected with the creation of money out of nothing, because banks create it in order to lend it, not in order to spend it. So unless we put these other building blocks in place, then I think we can't have a complete discussion about this, and we can't see why it is so important to have an honest monetary system, with just this component.
Assalamu alaikum guys, me again, reminding you to head over to islam21c.com/donate to keep the lights on Islam 21c. We pride ourselves on being independent and being funded by the grassroots community.
Now I was going to say, and I think this is so key to it, is re-looking at the whole way we interact with money and wealth, because ultimately, look, gold and silver, currency, it's a mechanism, but it's got to be part of something bigger, and how we approach money, how we trade. And this is why Islamic finance, under its current guise, isn't the solution. It's failed to meet its wider obligations, I feel, and I think Tarek still agrees that Islamic finance it could have been so much more. I know the title of the book is the same, but using gold and silver or creating and hoarding the wealth, even having money circulating in society, what does that mean? We've lost sight of that. What's value to us? Is value having X amount of profit, X amount of growth every year, or actually being able to feed more families, having more people working for you? I read, do you see this thing about Amazon? They said that, look, the amount that he earns is, I think, something like if you were from the time of Jesus alayhi salam until now, it's the equivalent of £200,000 a minute. It still wouldn't be as much wealth as Jeff Bezos has today, and you think about this, an obscene amount of wealth, and still they'd rather get rid of people, they automate everything, which has its place. But what about the value of being able to support a family? These aren't in any metrics. No one looks at metrics from that point of view. It's pure growth upon growth upon growth. And so you need to look at everything, how you bring it all together.
So one of the
just a back of the envelope calculation. I don't think that per minute earning rate is accurate, because there are 8,000 hours in a year, 60 minutes in an hour. So I think there are something like 480,000 minutes in a year. How much do you say? $200,000?
That's what they said. Yeah.
Times 80,000, that would be 80 million, 800 million, 8 billion, 16 billion a year over 2,000 years. No.
16.
Too much.
Sorry, just back of the
32
envelope.
trillion.
But yeah, are you sure you didn't sort of miss out the point sign there somewhere?
Probably. I've heard it. I regurgitated it. Let me find it whilst we're talking.
I think that number has to go back to the swamp.
It's okay, we can cut that bit out.
That's all right. Stick it there. He's worth 161 billion.
161 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
So only $31.9 trillion off in the calculation.
What's a few zeros between friends?
Absolutely.
I think we should include this because we have to expose him. Right? His mathematics is terrible.
Absolutely. So one of the things that people say, 200,000 a day. You say okay?
Yeah, 200,000. If you made $200,000 every day since the birth of Jesus Christ to today, you would still have less money than Jeff Bezos.
That's better. I can accept that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
I only a little bit of interest there.
Now
you forgot the compounded interest.
you
Yeah.
compounded it. And then
Yeah.
But there you go.
suddenly it's believable.
Now it's believable, yeah. Mashallah. If you have a negative interest, you know.
Yeah.
That reminds me, what's your view of negative interest though? Because
This is very
we had this discussion, Umar and I, a few months back.
Yes. My view of negative interest.
Yeah. Omar, which country was it that was?
Was it Denmark? I think it was one of the Nordic
Been doing
countries.
it for some time. You give, I mean, it's funny actually how it all seems to work in favor of the banks because, when it's positive interest, the bank lends you money and takes back more later. But now that it's negative interest, it's the bank that borrows the money and gives you back less later. So, I think actually there's something not gone right. It's a bit like one of these sort of. Do you remember Daffy Duck? How he was always doing the bad deal.
Yeah.
Do you ever see those cartoons? You're too young, Salman, obviously. But he. So, look, if. There are serious questions to ask people who are really struggling badly to own a home, and they're paying rent, at the rate of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10%. If you're up in Middlesbrough, for example, you'll pay 10% of the value of the home every year on rent. Now,
Wow.
I have a friend in Germany who's being offered a 10-year loan at fixed 0.8% interest, right? And if you look at that you can borrow money at less than 1% interest per year, or you can pay 10% on your rental, right? The question comes, how close to zero do we have to go before the arguments of wealth preservation become stronger than the arguments of riba? Because there are conflicting arguments here. Now, these questions have become very real in the last few weeks because the government is offering quite substantial loans with no interest or capital repayments in the first year, and you can repay at any time. They ask for no security. They lend it to a company which you can allow to go bankrupt, and there'll be no claim on your personal assets. Now, technically, because you pay interest in the second and subsequent years, traditional Sharia would prohibit that, okay?
Because it's written into the contract.
Because it's written into the contract. But then people are happy to have electricity supply contracts which say if they're late paying their bill, they'll pay interest. But all of a sudden now, with these loans being offered, there are people saying, no, you can't take it. You might pay interest. Well, why didn't you say that about electricity then? Right? So, we have to really decide how much contextualization we're going to in difficult circumstances. We're not living in traditional Arabia, right? In difficult circumstances, when there are a very limited range of options and some businesses are at risk of folding, complete real risk, not hypothetical risk. And this is why some of the Hanafi scholars in the north of England in the last crisis were saying, look, if you really must, you can take a loan from the bank to keep the business going, right? They did contextual. One might not approve of that contextualization, but the issue of contextualization is there, definitely. Now, so with negative interest, of course, this changes things in the sense that if you are the borrower as a Muslim borrowing at negative interest rates, they don't need to apply to you, because when you repay the loan, you can always repay what you borrowed, not less than it, right? Now, if the power is in your hands, then the contextual situation becomes critical, because although the law says one thing, the practice within your hands makes the law irrelevant, because the law says you repay less than you borrowed, but your practice will repay exactly what you did borrow, right?
So some people are saying that it's similar to the creditor basically foregoing his own right by giving it as like a gift, so you're paying back less. What do you think about that?
Yes, if it's agreed that at the time of repayment and not a custom of the society and not contracted at the outset, then there are things that can be done. So loans can be repaid better. You repay the loan at the value you borrowed, and then you give the person a gift. But it must not be contracted, and it must not be the custom of the society, because If it is the custom, then the qawaid is that custom has the force of law, right? If it's
I mean, if you're paying back less rather than more.
Yeah,
so if you're paying back less in terms of a negative interest,
it's definitely technically, traditionally speaking, it is a riba contract because money for money has to be equal. Right?
I was thinking that as well. Even if it's negative interest.
I mean, the way it could work is if you gave someone some money and you said, listen, you only need to pay me back. So if I gave you £100 and I say you only need to pay me back £90, £10 is, I've forgiven that as a it's a charity or whatever. In that dynamic,
See, it depends how you look at it. It gets a bit murky now.
No, but this is the point I'm saying is that when you're looking at negative interest rate, you got to look at its application in the wider system. Right, and this is the same argument works the other way, because people argue, well, me just buying my house, why is it so bad? And then when you map it against the price of a house rising, and cash loan and loans, how that means the value of things deteriorate, etc. Then you start seeing its impact on a macro level. And so negative interest, what's happening with the money once you forego it? What are they doing at the other end? You need to look at it within that system as a whole. On a micro level, there are things that you can negotiate, agree with between each other, but it's the money flows within the system that need to be looked at, and what you're signing up contractually and what happens.
Contractually is the important thing. I mean, in Switzerland, it is forced upon depositors. They must lend money to the bank over certain limits. If the contract says you put X in, you'll get less than X back.
Yeah,
and so that context is important. Yeah. Whereas if someone says, well, you don't need to borrow money from us, right, and you don't need to lend it, but if you do lend money to me, I'll pay you back what you gave, and you go into that transaction, and then at the time of going into the transaction, the lender gives you a gift, right?
Yeah.
All right.
It's also about who has the upper hand as well.
Well, yeah, it's a very different thing. I mean, I can lend you £90, at 0% interest, and give you a gift of £10 at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So you get £100 from me, and you repay 90. And if they're not combined, if there's no contractual force, that says you must enter into this transaction, then you can start to. I mean, one has to look at what the context is in each case, but I think you could argue that that would be a permissible kind of contract combination. Yeah. There are some contract combinations which are not permissible, which is the one I mentioned earlier. Yeah, which is lending money and requiring that the borrower pays you a gift. Yeah. Right. That's a well-known legal trick. But this is different. This is saying, here's a gift of 10. And here's a loan of 90, repay me 90, right? Now, for someone to say that this is prohibited, when it's not being forced on a person, it's not committing an overt injustice that we can see, then I think we have to be much more careful. It's a different case now.
Yeah, I didn't thought about that. Jazakallah khair. I mean, I just want to pick up on something you mentioned. You're talking about the loans that are available to people now because of the pandemic. If somebody is watching this program, they're going through some kind of financial difficulty, what are the resources or packages and so forth available to them and their company if they have a small business, for example? What do you advise them to do if they're going through financial difficulty due to COVID-19 pandemics?
Well, so it depends what situation you're in. If you're a tenant in a shop, for example, then your business rates should be relieved from you in most cases, not in all, but in the vast majority of cases. If you are a self-employed person, you will be entitled in many cases to receive a grant of free money equal to a certain proportion of your monthly income over the last a period of time, which I think can be over a year, maybe as much as 3 years, again, depending on your situation. If you are a business that is trading and has been trading for some time and not in financial distress as of the end of last year, then you will be able to receive or eligible for a business loan on very soft terms. This is the one I mentioned earlier. No interest or capital repayments in the first year, and no security.
And you also mentioned like it's possible for you to declare bankruptcy after that, but I'm sure you didn't mean that as a recommendation.
I'm just explaining to you that this is an issue of contextualization. The law may say you have to pay interest, but if practice, I'm only giving that as one example. If the law says you must pay interest, but in practical terms you won't because you just declare bankruptcy, then as an Islamic scholar, how do you judge that? Because the practice gives a different outcome to what the legal contract says, right? We have to come face to face with that kind of question because it's real and practical now, and there may be people who do that, right?
Yeah, it's like the student loan thing, isn't it? Taking student loan and not paying it back, or not, earning the threshold from which your income is taken to pay it back, the student loan. You would argue that, well, I'm not hitting the threshold where I legally need to pay it back, and therefore I'm not paying back any interest. And then after 30 years, it's cancelled. And these are the type of scenarios now that the scholars have to judge upon. I was going to say also as a resource is that if you're depending on the rateable value of your business, you'll receive either a grant of, I think, 15,000 or 30,000. So that's something else.
And they don't have to pay this back?
No, it's a grant.
25, I think. 10,025.
With the 10 and 25? Okay, yeah. It's it's a grant. You don't have to pay it back.
Okay, that's good.
From your council, but they will contact you. All of this information is available on the government website. They're setting out the help for self-employed, on business rates, on loans, and the grants to small businesses of either 10 or 20. There's a whole series. There's the furlough wages. There are,
the furlough thing's interesting actually, because I think it's masking the reality of the economic situation we're in. A lot of people who are on furlough, they just don't know that they're redundant yet. No, effectively, because once the government stops paying the furlough, you'll then see whether the companies still keep them on or not. At the moment, they don't have to make that decision. So it's being masked for the economic situation that we're in, really. I was going to say that there's the ratedpure.com has a lot of information on that, with the bounce back loans, as Tarek was speaking about, where they're actually the loans where they're interest free for a year are provided by high street banks, and the government said that it's underwritten it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not government loans. It's still with a private institution.
Yes, that's right. It's
the way they've worked it out. Yeah, it's government backed. Yeah. So, but it's still done in the same way. You got to go through the same process with getting those loans.
Well, one of the things that people wanted me to ask and talk about was the issue of buying houses, right? And is it my thing is do we have the financial literacy as a community to know when investing in buying a house is a good idea, or putting some money somewhere else is better, or renting and so on and so forth? So what you just mentioned about these loans, could someone use or avail these interest-free loans, for example, to buy a house or part of a house and use it for that?
Sorry, which interest-free loans?
The interest-free loans that you mentioned for a year or whatever.
No, they're specifically conditions that be used for personal use. They're to businesses. For business use. Yeah.
What if your business
read between the lines, Tarek? Like what Salman's asking.
What if your business is wink, wink, nudge, nudge, buying houses, and then
I'm disappointed in you as a leader of the Muslim community, Salman.
You don't know me at all, do you?
But this is an important point, Salman. I was going to say actually, because sometimes people who deal with Islamic finance or finance, we kind of restrict it to just the absolute black and white rules.
Yeah.
And it's so much richer than that. Your intention that's involved, cheating people, misrepresenting things for the sake of financial gain. If people are in a situation, so we're looking at the situation now where people, if they own or they have shops, etc., or retail businesses, they don't want to pay their landlords because they say, well, look, we're not in a situation where we've made any money. Or if I know with some people own takeaways, they'll be making money, but they'll still say to the landlord they're not going to pay. They haven't made any money. So from their point of view, they can cry that, the economic situation, but that's still an injustice to the landlord. If you signed a contract and you're in that position to be able to pay him, then to not do so, it's taking advantage of that. And it's all these subtle things that, I guess we as a community need to look a little bit more into. It's not just, the pure strict letter of the law, but it's being honest in the way that we deal with each other as well.
Yeah. So about the home financing schemes and stuff, is Tarek frozen, or can you hear Neko?
Okay, can you hear me?
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalam, yeah, I can hear you. I got worried because the last thing I heard was, Salman, I'm very disappointed with you, and then you just left. I was actually trying to build up a segue to an actual question, and that is, how do you buy a house in a halal way? This is what a lot of people want to know still. This is the thing that you were, I have heard you speak about for years and years and years. This is one thing loads of people talk about. There's a few things we have today that maybe didn't exist before. We have things like the Halo scheme. We have yielders. Umer's involved in that. So, how do you get a house today in the UK in a halal way?
Has Umer not answered that question while I was away?
No, we're waiting for you to come back.
I was on purpose.
How do you buy a house in halal way? Tarek, do you want to go first?
That's a big question. I hate to tell you this, but it's actually 9 minutes past 7, and I did say it 9 minutes past 6.
Oh, where'd you begin?
Well, I mean, look, I think, again, there are the legal issues. There is the context. Mm-hmm. And there are some things which no one can tell someone else what he does or doesn't do, right? There is a point at which a person has to weigh up his own position. Yeah. But if you look at this from a purely legal point of view, I felt then, I mean, just as a technical thing, whether I have any bias for or against Islamic, I mean, I could, a non-Muslim could look at a contract of Islamic home finance and say, well, actually, that's an interest charge on cash flow terms. Just on cash flow terms, because a certain amount of money is paid out now from the bank, and a certain amount of money has to be paid back to the bank in due course through one circuit or another. Okay, and if your understanding of riba is money now for more money later, contracted at the outset, then this brings into play the question of, should we look at what the legal document says, or should we look at what the substance says? Yeah. So these two things, the context, what is your situation, number one. Number two, do you care about what legal words are attached to a contract, or do you care about the substance of it? Right. Yeah. Those are two things which are deep and long questions which need to be asked, because everybody will tell you, oh, murabaha works like this, ijara works like this, diminishing partnership, and they will go on endlessly talking about these things. But at the end of the day, really it comes down to, what is your context, and do you care more about substance or legal? Because I have met people who said, I don't care what you say, Tarek, my scholar has said this, and I will follow him, to the grave, basically. Right. So there is a kind of person, and God bless him, inshallah, if it's sincere, then maybe it's okay, that he doesn't do his own thinking. But for me, I have to do my own thinking on this, and I will not accept that a money now for more money later transaction contracted at the start can ever be what we're about in terms of finance.
So what about
to be about risk sharing, exactly. Share the good times and the bad times with our clients as investors. And as sellers, you buy an object of sale from us, a house, and you pay us. So property developers do that. Banks don't. They give you money, they take money. They are not in the business of selling an object of sale, a house, an orange, a table, a car, for money. That's not what they're in. They're in the business of selling money for money. And when it comes to that, their substance is money now for more money later. So that, as Umer says, is the model we've gone for. We've spent 35 years on it. It has really got us nowhere, actually. We've got nothing to offer the world that's different from what they've got already, except ours is more expensive. Right? So what actually have we brought? I mean, we just made ourselves look very bad.
I mean, so aside from the whole Islamic mortgage in quotes kind of paradigm, is there not a genuinely halal, genuinely risk sharing alternative to home purchasing?
I think that I haven't actually seen one. I've seen some that have got reasonably close. The Halo one kind of got close. There's only one problem with it. Yeah, Umer, you know, that you can pay rent for 19 years. You have the right to, the house becomes yours at the end of the 20th year. You know, for example, that's the contract term. But if you miss one rental payment, that right evaporates.
Really?
And that's grotesque injustice.
Yeah.
Right? You can pay that rental for 19 years and 11 months, but you miss the final one in, month 240, right, at the end of the 20 years, and you lose your right to have that house. Right. Now, so we've got to look at, this is why I say we have to look at these contracts, at the specific terms of each one of them before pronouncing. But in other conditions of that contract, if you look at them, they look... the trouble is they don't have any money left at the moment, I think. Sort of withheld the service, I've heard.
I've heard that they've got some more money. They're going to be hitting the market again. And was going to be working with them to try and make it more Islamic. So this point that you're making, if they go for the Sharia certification route, is something that they can include. But I mean, other than Halo, I mean, there's shared ownership, again, which kind of is potential, but you're limited, excuse me, on the housing stock. Primary finance, inshallah, when they launch, there's something to look out for, definitely. But outside, I mean, are you familiar with the al-Rajhi model, Tarek?
The al-Rajhi model?
Yeah, for the Murabba, for home purchasing. I was trying to get some more.
Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
From
Saudi Arabia. So,
I haven't seen this one. Is it new? Are you talking about?
Yes, I was looking at it. It's a pure, from what I understand, it's a pure murabaha, that they buy the house and they sell it to a markup and deferred, which is nice and straightforward.
If they genuinely do that, because then they are traders of houses, and you can sell for installment payment, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, there are models available. It's just about having access to them in the UK. I'm with Tarek. I don't believe that the current Islamic mortgages are genuinely Islamic, and the challenge I always have with them is that, look, there is not today, I don't know if you've met anyone, Tarek, who says that these Islamic products are in of themselves absolutely permissible in any time, in any space, in any way that they use. They always come with a caveat. And the problem is people aren't appreciating that caveat, because if you're making allowances, then why not go for something that's going to be cheaper? If something's not completely halal, that ultimately meets so much more of the Islamic requirements than the Islamic mortgage that you have.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. Last reminder, I promise. Head over to islam21c.com/donate to help this movement get to the next level. So we have genuine, high-quality media articulating Islam in the 21st century and developing confident Muslims impacting the world for the better. Yeah. Okay, well, it's been an hour, I think, and I've just got one more question I wanted to put to you guys. You mentioned the problems with the current system that we have. Well, let's think a bit more macro now this time. You mentioned issues of money creation, issues of interest-based economy and so forth. Is there a place on earth right now, because this is one of the problems we have when we're trying to offer somebody a vision of what could be, a vision that we believe is better and more just. Is there somewhere on earth right now where we could point to and say, look, it doesn't have to be this way. Look at such and such place that's doing it now. And maybe there isn't not doing what we want to do, but there is a way to carve out or set foundations for something genuinely novel and genuinely more just.
I don't think so myself, in terms of the monetary arrangements. I believe that every country is essentially under the same system, and there are compelling reasons why they should be at the political level, because one can be ostracized, I mean, but an example I give is that the IMF charter requires that to be a member of the IMF, you must not use gold as currency, right? So, I mean, there's one political overriding factor that most countries want to have the right of, being a member of the IMF in case they need to buy food for their people, and need to borrow money to do it, right? So for reasons such as that, and political pressures and so on, going to the sort of monetary arrangements that many people and many Muslims included would like has not been possible, and therefore we have to look in history books. But history books are quite good, I mean. You can read many history books with very romantic histories of how wonderful things were in Granada or in and the thing is that to a large extent some of these books are true. They really were. One can often look at Western countries and say, my God, look at what they've built for themselves. And yet it's only been the last few weeks that we've seen that a lot of what has been built was built on the back of slave labor or the exploitation of others, right, in some way, right? Now, this wasn't the case to anywhere near that extent. I mean, there was exploitation, there were slaves, but this level of oppression, that may have built some parts of the West, did not build Granada or Constantinople, I believe. It was actually at a systemic level that they got a lot of things right for quite a long period of time, and that produced the kind of fruit which we don't get today. So if we look in those history books, and we're prepared to be honest that it wasn't all roses, but the generality of it was a lot better than we have today, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's two things on this. I remember, was it around 9 years ago now when Libya fell, when Gaddafi was ousted? At that time, Libya had no foreign debt. And I remember desperately trying to speak to people who are in Islamic finance to let's go out there and try something. So if a country doesn't have any debt, it's a little bit easier to try and come up with a blueprint, but it just wasn't happening. And I think to this day, they're still not stable because we kind of need that type of country to trial and say, let's come up with some mechanisms where we can.
So are you saying there's no way to break out of this system? So
look, I was in conversation with certain ministers in Pakistan who have a mandate to make Pakistan riba free. Imagine this, Tarek. They've got court papers. Riba officially was outlawed in Pakistan, I think about 20 years ago. There's still the court papers, but they didn't know how to implement it. And the point is now, because of outside influence, debt, the whole overall economic system, detangling yourself from it is the issue. And especially if you've got debts. And this is the problem, because
the practical short-term realities overwhelm, the long-term planning people who theoretically might have some power to institute laws or institutions or processes aren't there for long enough. There's a coup or there's a, corruption and they're kicked out, so, it may just be that people have to do it for themselves, and maybe things, that we expect to come from the top down actually have to happen from the bottom up. There is nothing stopping somebody, if they want, using gold as money. I mean, there's a payment card called Glint now, which offers you, gold in Switzerland in your name, and a card which you can go to do your shopping with, using the Visa or the MasterCard network in this case. You tap on it and it takes gold from your... Now,
really?
There are practical things. Wow. Yes, there are, and there are many ways of doing this. There are property developers in the Muslim community who could sell their houses on a murabaha basis and bypass the banks entirely if they wanted. If our community got together, there are many things that we can do, right? And the question is, should we wait in the system that we have, where there is corruption and oppression and massive debt and overriding political problems to cope with in the short term? Should we just continue waiting for someone from the government to do something for us? Or should we as a community use the chance that we already have, right?
Agree, completely agree.
Omar, I gave you a nice slow ball and you just let it slip by you. I thought you were going to knock it for 6. You haven't mentioned waqf at all today.
I know, because
in terms of top down versus bottom up approach, empowering the community to get things that work for their own interests and their own long-term planning. Tell us what waqf is and how we can use that.
Yeah. So as part of the National Waqf Fund, we're looking at strategic and sustainable ways in which we can support the Muslim community. And one of the visions is actually home ownership in the long term. If we, through the Waqf, we build up a fund, it may not be now, today or tomorrow, but in 20 or 50 years' time, using that as patient capital, people can own their own homes in an Islamic structure. You're not looking for profit returns. You're not answerable to shareholders. So you can create real structures that allow people to own their homes through the Waqf, inshallah. One of the aims potentially is also a Waqf bank. When you're not restricted by...
Uh-oh.
No, but I mean, having...
Don't sell out just yet, bro.
No, having money in deposit. Most Muslims, I think, if they were said, listen, you can keep your money in a secure storage facility
in Switzerland.
You don't earn any money. You don't earn any money on it, but it's used for investing and helping charity causes, and your capital is still there, inshallah, with some risk.
Your vision over here. I mean, what do you know that we don't, Salman?
Exactly.
Tarek is laughing.
Almost foreign holiday fund or something.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the restrictions to lift. Yeah. No, but I think we've got enough things in our toolkit.
Pardon?
I want to go on holiday too, and I think if he can get free holidays out of this Waqf fund, then I should be considered also. I've talked at least as much as he has today. And I actually think that some of the things I said was intelligent.
No, mashallah. Look, we've got a lot of talent in the Muslim community, alhamdulillah. We've now, with digital access, we've got abilities to innovate in a way that we didn't have historically. And I think people also look genuine disruptive approaches to things. Banks are on their back foot at the moment because of the whole fintechs, etc. Not to say that fintechs are the answer, but we need to get the minds thinking of these problems and finding ways through them. Tarek's absolutely right. Look, there are people, and this is something else to actually the business people out there. We as a community don't value the benefit of giving loans without interest. This is hugely rewarding. If as a community we understood how beneficial it is and how rewarding it is Islamically to give loans without interest, then we stop thinking about giving money through that commercial lens, and we only think of when we give money through a business lens, which is risk and reward shared. It's changing our whole mindset. We can build properties and give them out. To stop someone from spending £1 in a haram way, it's hugely rewarding Islamically. People don't see that. To pull money out of the conventional system. And this is what I'm saying, rather than always looking at the impact of the individual transaction, because it's hard, isn't it? Like if you say to someone, how can buying my own house, paying 0.5% interest be so evil? People have these arguments. Yeah. But it's the system as a whole that when you look at it, there's no argument. They are like the surveyors of destruction in the last century, at least. If you look at the financial services and how they continue to take advantage of developing countries, which unfortunately are mainly Muslim majority countries now. All of the excess wealth is being used via what? Trade mechanisms, ultimately, isn't it?
It's a very interwoven system. It's true. I don't think, personally, I don't think one gets anywhere, worrying about this gigantic problem, because it's a guaranteed fail for you. You're not going to change the world. You'll just, I don't know, end up frustrated at 2 a.m. and get divorced or something. I don't know what it is, but you're not going. And one has to choose winnable objectives in one's life. I mean, one should certainly be concerned, but one should distinguish between one's circle of concern, which can be very wide, and a much narrower circle, which is one's circle of influence and what you can actually do something about, right? And so in that sense, I think, bottom up is the circle of action, and, the circle of concern may be top down, and, we can have concerns about that.
Actually, I mean, I completely agree with Tarek and what he's saying about the concern globally. But I think we should think globally if we can, even if we may not have the ability or the responsibility for changing things. One thing that COVID has shown us is that something that's come out of nowhere can actually fundamentally disrupt the entire global financial economic system. people are completely grounded. It's become normal. Did anyone expect this to happen? So just like that's happened out of nowhere, I think, inshallah, if people are thinking about it, there should be a way, or at least for us to try and work towards something that can change global injustice, which is financial at the moment. People have shown, one of the things that this whole COVID situation has shown is actually the countries which have fared it well are those who are able to produce something of real value, right? So all of the countries that were able to manage their own manufacturing, alhamdulillah, they've been able to fare it well. They've got real industry still going on. There's real activity. Those who are based purely on financial, systems, we don't know what position they're really in. So alhamdulillah, I think it's great. We definitely work on our circle of influence, but do connect yourselves to global problems and think, if Allah Azza wa Jalla gave you the tawfiq, how would you approach it? What would you do?
But the thing that I think we must deal with more is the practical situation in which an individual finds himself in, and the context which he's in, and issues of substance over form. These are things which really, where the conversation can at least produce some benefit for people's lives, and maybe we have to accept, and I'm sorry, I know this sounds terribly compromising in many ways. There's a difference between traditional legal opinions and the standard of performance, if I can put it that way, that we should be expecting of people. Because we frankly, we cannot be prophets, or saints, if you believe in it. We cannot be at that level, most of us. And to ask somebody to be at that level may actually be an injustice. We have to give them something that's achievable, right? And our financial solutions, because it's about eating, about having a home, a roof over. And we have to think really carefully about how we handle the situation as a minority in a difficult situation, when even a majority is in trouble.
Jazakallah khair, especially important when you're highlighting the difference between the hukum and the theory and the practical, fatwa that you give an individual, because a lot of the times the two are not the same. I'm wary of the time. We've had a lot of fun talking to you two brothers. Jazakallah khairan. Hope you had fun as well. And Jazakumullah khairan to you at home for watching as well. If you like this podcast, give it a like and a share, and give some comments of encouragement to brother Tarek as well. We haven't seen him for a while, so maybe if people mention how much they've missed seeing him, he'll come on again inshallah one day. Check out his books as well. I've actually got it here. The problem with interest. I've been calling it something else, I think.
When was the first edition? When did you first write
this one? I've got
97. Yeah,
97.
They're the third edition actually, but it's they're sold finally, incredibly. They sold, and I haven't reprinted anything, so I'm afraid you can't buy it.
Okay.
I've got
a copy here if anyone wants to buy it. For somebody checked it earlier on today, they said it was going on for like 50 something pounds, £60 on Amazon or something. So if someone wants to buy it for £55, let me know. This is actually a signed copy.
The people who never wrote a word for my book, they actually end up making more money than I did out of it.
It's business, bro. It's business. And this one is a signed copy as well. It says, Salman, best wishes. It says, best wishes, something, wassalam, 2011-2007. Okay, this is the second edition, alhamdulillah. It's got a bit of wear and tear, a bit of mileage in it, but I'll put it up on eBay, see what I get for it, inshallah.
MashaAllah, Tarek's first book, it was what inspired me to get into Islamic finance. May Allah accept it from Tarek.
Really? MashaAllah. Yeah. So it's your fault.
And I always think about him when I go on holidays with my son.
The air hostess is, in business class. Here's your starter and appetizer, sir. And you're like, thank you. May Allah reward Tarek. Jazakallah khairan, brothers. It's been lovely to see you all again. And again, thank you for watching at home. Press like, subscribe, and all that kind of stuff. Remember to tap the bell icon as well to make sure you get notified on any of any new uploads. We're on Twitter, Google Play Store, Apple Play Store, Facebook, and all that kind of good stuff. So, yeah, that's it from us now. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.